Welcome in National Museum in Warsaw on our meeting Different Perspectives on Art, Truth Behind the Old Master Painting. Our meeting is organized with the exhibition, temporary exhibition that is currently taking place in our museum that is entitled Different Perspectives, Dutch and Flemish Painting from ERGO Hestii collection. We are very grateful for the grant from Government of Flanders that enabled us to meet with our great participants that I will introduce you in a moment, and that we will be able to talk about old masters, but from new perspective, that we would like to see what the paintings that we are showing here in our exhibition, what they can tell us today about the past. Could we really trust the paintings? And what can we learn about people living in maybe different times than our now? I would like now to introduce the participants. First, I will start with Anna Dzierzgowska, who is here with me in the studio in Warsaw, in National Museum. Anna is a history and her story high school teacher, feminist and translator. She translated and co-translated 17 books, including those authored by Rebecca Solnit, Susan Faludi, Christine Gozzi, and dozen articles for, among others, modern art institutions like Biennale Warszawa or the Center for Contemporary Art. Welcome, Anna.
Welcome.
I'm very happy to have you here.
And I'm happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
And in our Brussels studio, we have Dr. Katrien Lichtert. She is an independent curator and researcher for different institutions and museums such as Beaux-Arts, Centre for Fine Arts in Brussels, and the Museum of Oudenaarde and the Flemish Art Dance. From 2007 onwards, she worked at Ghent University on an interdisciplinary project focusing on representations of cities in the southern Low Countries. In 2014, she obtained a PhD degree with a dissertation on Peter Bruegel the Elder and representation of urban landscapes. In 2015, she founded Ludens Art Projects, which makes art and art historical knowledge accessible for everyone who wants to engage with, enjoy, and learn about art. Since 2018, she curated exhibitions devoted to Adrian Brouwer and Peter Bruegel the Elder. Welcome, Katrien.
Well, thank you. Hi, and thank you for having me, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to have you here with me. And maybe I will introduce myself just for the order. My name is Aleksandra Janiszewska, and I'm curator here in National Museum in Warsaw. I'm curating the exhibition, Different Perspectives, and I'm also working here with the collection of Netherlandish, Dutch and Flemish painting in National Museum in Warsaw. And this is my great pleasure to invite you to our meeting where we can discuss from different perspectives, because as you see, we have specialists from different fields. And this is our goal here, to see what the paintings now can offer us when we are looking at them from different professional perspectives. So I'd like to start from the first painting that is also opening our exhibition, and that is Sebastian Franks and his allegory of summer. And my question is, how do we now, what can we read from those paintings? What do you think it's, why they are important for us now, and what can we read from them? I know, Anna, would you like to start? So what you see, because I think the most important part always is to tell from the start what we see in the painting and then try to understand why this is there.
For me as a teacher, of course, the most important question is always what can I make of it with my students and for my students? And this is one of my favorite paintings in the whole exhibition. And what can I see? First of all, I don't see any allegory. I just see people, working people. I see how they are clothed. I see what they do, and this is a very interesting source material. And of course, I like this picture because it's very sensual. And I like the opulence of these fruits, and I like the colors. It's very carnal. So this is interesting for me. We are in Netherlands. This is Renaissance painting, yes, late Renaissance, and we have almost Barockian sensuality here.
That's true. And for me, it's important also because it's very much indebted to Bruegel, right, Katrien? It's
of course. I'm very happy you opened with this painting because, of course, it refers to Bruegel, the Bruegel who was one of maybe the biggest artists of the Netherlands, of the 16th century.
That's true.
And what we see here, well, it's a series actually that goes back to a series of paintings made by Bruegel in 1565. And maybe we can switch to the Bruegel paintings. So actually what is so special about this series is that, well, first of all, there were 6 paintings, but there are only 5 known today. If you look at them from a landscape point of view, so like the Flemish landscape tradition, it's one of the zeniths, maybe one of the highest point of landscape painting, of early Netherlandish painting, maybe in general. And what Bruegel did is actually he merged different traditions, being the representation of the seasons first and then the representation of the months. So he blended those together. So that goes back to, as you know, the miniature paintings and the tradition of representing winter scenes, summer scenes, Lent and all those things. But actually what is so special about it is that he merged these kind of traditions and he painted them on a monumental scale. So that's the first thing. And then the second important thing is that we know who ordered the paintings, which is also something very specific. And Nicolaas Jongelink, he was a very rich merchant from Antwerp. And we also know the location where those paintings were hung, which is something very exceptional. Because if you talk about art, it offers us a window on the world, okay, but often we don't know the exact social context in which these paintings were consumed. And I think that's one of the core questions also in this interesting discussion we can have about different perspectives. And so with Bruegel, in this case, we know that they were hung in the dining room of Nicolaas Jongelink, his mansion, his suburban villa outside the city of Antwerp, which is very interesting because there's a theory of my colleague Tine Meegank, who says that probably they were hung in the dining room and they were altered by views on the countryside. So you saw the paintings and then a view on Nicolaas Jongelink, his mansion and his land. So it's really an interaction between reality and then the paintings themselves. And I think that also touches upon the core of what we can learn from art or what art is, because a very important concept there is mimesis, that art imitates nature, of course, and it goes very well together in that idea of the cycle of the months and the seasons of Bruegel, I think.
That is very, very interesting because I didn't know about this placement of these landscapes, and it also goes very well with something that I think is important with these landscapes, that the nature is in some way dictating the people how they should behave, because different seasons need different ways of working inside of the nature. And what you say, if between those paintings there were like open windows to the landscape that I understand was also like the fields that need to be cropped, right? Or just, I don't know, like, so also it means that these landscapes within the windows, it was changing according to seasons, and you could also see like peasants, right? For example, or just people strolling around. So it's really amazing how it works well together. Like it's like a Gesamtkunstwerk almost. Like it's really.
But it's also, what is also very interesting about it is that they functioned. Why did they hang in the dining room? Because Jongeling or other rich merchants or burghers from Antwerp in that time, they invited like-minded people in their suburban mansion or and to discuss topics that were relevant in that day. And so those paintings functioned also as what we call conversation pieces. Huh? So they offered these kind of tools to talk about things that they found relevant. And there's also a specific interest in country life back in that time, which comes from a humanistic point of view. Working on the land, of course they didn't work themselves, but an interesting of the rich burghers from the city who went to the country life and enjoyed the country life. And yeah, so it's interesting to see these paintings from that perspective.
Maybe it also helps us understand why the people always eating on these paintings, or almost always eating, because there's a lot of scenes with people resting from work, eating, drinking, yeah. And if they were in the dining room, I think it was the next level of dialogue. Eating when looking at other people.
Some sort of a mirror of the actual viewers. Yeah, but for me also what is very interesting in this type of landscapes, maybe not only Bruegel, but what can we see in the next paintings is the winter. And I'm here referring to the Hunters on the Snow, one of the series by Bruegel, and we have landscape of winter and we have free time. I mean like people spending their free time like leisure. And yes, I think leisure is very interesting subject also, that we can learn how people were enjoying the landscape not only for hard work but also for enjoyment. So Anna, how is for you as an as a history teacher, this type of images?
This leisure subject is interesting for me because we are now living in a world obsessed with work and obsessed with overworking. And what I see in these paintings, what I can talk about with my students, that of course the peasants work very hard. This is one of the hardest jobs, working with corpse, but they also have lots and lots of leisure time, and leisure time was their dream. And we see this on these paintings. The leisure, the time when you don't have to work, this is life. This is when you live, not the time when you have to work. But what I also see on this winter pictures is death. There are also the hunting scene, the coldness, the snow. This, for me, it's also about death, about the period when life ends, stops. Yeah.
These Hunters on the Snow, they bring me to the next painting that we have in the exhibition, and that is Mustard and the Flight to Egypt. Mm-hmm. That for me, it's a very creative way of using the theme that Bruegel was creating in the Hunters on the Snow. So these leisures on the frozen lake, but he put it in a very like nice way into the religious subject, but not only. So maybe we'll start from your perspective, this painting. Yeah.
Well, I think there are several separate things going on. First of all, we have the winter landscape as a genre or a pictorial category, which was developed, well, in the southern Netherlands in the 16th century. Well, we see winter scenes before, but mainly they are just like in the background or something, and it's not on a monumental scale like what Peter Bruegel does actually. Yeah? So, and it is no coincidence that the winter landscape is developing in the 1560s. So in the 16th century, because it is in an era that we refer to as the Little Ice Age. And the Little Ice Age is actually a period of extremes, you can say, very extreme climate conditions. Because actually the decades following the 1560s, it was the coldest winters that people had since like the last ice age, which was like 10,000 years ago or something. So it's no coincidence that exactly then they started to paint these winter landscapes. For example, we know that in 1564, the Schelde, the river, the Schelde in Antwerp, it was completely frozen, and it was like half a meter thick, the ice. So people write about it, and you see it in these landscapes. So that's, first of all, it refers to the historical context. It's a window on the world, what happens at that point in time. But then, indeed, you have the practice of the leisure, people enjoying the ice, and it is very well possible that it's just a depiction of this, but then again, and this also relates to the broader topic of genre scenes, sometimes there are hidden meanings also, because ice skating, it's a slippery thing, and it often refers to the slipperiness, if to say so, of life in general, because there are also a lot of uncertainties on our path through life. And we see in a lot of written sources of that day that ice skating is also related to, well, uncertainties. You can fall, you can fall in a hole in the water, whatever. And that's, especially in the printed medium, we see that that's going on. And then here, there's another thing. What Mostard does is a sort of actualization of the scene, because it's actually a historical theme, a very popular theme, the flight to Egypt. But he transforms it. And that Bruegel also does that. Bruegel is the king of that, like in a typical Flemish village, a winter scene, and the costumes are actualized, if you want. So it's a contemporization of a theme, and well, there are a lot of things going on.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I think it has this actualization with 80 years war. So I wonder how it is for you, that kind of painting.
Of course, this is a war painting, and this is one of the paintings which very profoundly speaks today, because this is also about refugees.
Yeah,
and this is and about winter refugees. So I think this, for me as a teacher, this could be a very interesting point of reference to the totally different discussion about refugees, about mothers flying with children, about war, and about winter condition. And of course, when we speak about the Little Ice Age, there is a new theory that one of the reasons this Little Ice Age occurred was the death of indigenous people in America, which created conditions when trees regrow in America, and it changed the climate on the whole Earth.
So it make the temperature lower, because more trees.
More trees, yeah. Less people, more trees. The temperature dropped. So every time I look at the pictures of winter landscapes from the 17th century, I think about the colonization, about the genocide in Americas.
This is very interesting. I haven't thought about it.
I don't know if it's true, but I just read that it's one of the theories why this little ice age.
Yeah, I think it might have some meaning to that, because I also read that the forests were rapidly growing, because really the death of Native Americans, it was like 98% of population. So maybe we would go to the painting by Van Ostade, because then we can see how the ice was used to transport, you know, like the frozen rivers, the frozen lakes, they were used as highways. Like we have here in Winter Landscape with figures on a frozen river. So that also brings us to the subject that I would like to think a bit, how the paintings are informative for us about traveling in the 17th century. How, because I think that most people, when they think about old times, they think that people were very static. That, you know, like you were only in one place, and I think that they were more on the go than we are now today. And we can also find it on like this subject of traveling for different purposes.
Of course, yeah, I think, well, it's true what you say, people have this idea of people not traveling back in those days, but people were much more mobile than you would believe. First of all, with the start of the 80 Years' War, there was a huge migration of people from the south to the north, which again made that the north flourished after the south, but that's a different topic. But so people were much more mobile than you would think. And also, if you think about artists, traveling artists, there were a lot of traveling artists. Even in the 15th century, it was a minority. From the 16th century, it began to be more and more well, usual to travel. If you think from the 1519, Gossard, and then Bruegel, and all the other artists from the Low Countries, like from the second half of the 16th century, it was common to make a travel to Italy, to go and see and experience the art of Italy and antiquity there. So traveling was much more common. And if you think about the Low Countries, first of all, the Low Countries is a coastal region. We're in the lower basin of the Rijn, Schelde, Meuse delta. So water is essential in our low, flat countries. So it's something that defines us. This geographical factor really defines the Low Countries. It really defines our identity, actually. So the water is essential. And actually those rivers and the canals and all those things, the water in essence brought wealth, brought trade. And where there is trade, there is money, and where there's money, there's art. So actually, well, to say very briefly, Karel van Mander, the big biographer who writes the biography of Bruegel and many of the other early Netherlandish painters, he says about Antwerp, like the city is very wealthy, and where there's a lot of wealth and economic power, art flourishes. And it's always like that, actually. So we have a lot to thank to our geographical location and to water. And what is so interesting about these kind of paintings is actually that they offer us a window again on daily life and on practices of how people traveled. These are minor travels, but the importance of the waterways and the canals, and also the tools people used, and the daily life as such. So it's a genre scene, but not in the sense, as we will see maybe later on, a genre scene with hidden meanings that you have to decode. I don't think so. It's more life as it was, and to enjoy these kind of scenes, actually, I think.
And also Netherlands were very proud of those roads, I mean especially water roads that were very much facilitating traveling even between Antwerp and, for example, I don't know, like Amsterdam or Den Haag, right? Because it was quicker.
It was very much used. It's something that people are not aware of because, for example, here in Brussels, well, the Zenne, the river, it was a whole scandal because in the 19th century, a lot of those rivers were actually closed because of sanitary reasons. That's a different story. But people traveled through water a lot here in the Low Countries. And also artists traveled back and forth from south and north. If you think, for example, about Adriaan Brouwer.
Yes.
He was born in Oudenaarde. He traveled to Haarlem, then Amsterdam, and then he came back to Antwerp. But we know that he traveled, well, several times from Antwerp back to Haarlem. So it was much more common than people think. And also from a perspective of artists, artistic dialogue and artists influencing each other. We should not underestimate the mobility of artists, but also of art, prints and...
Yeah. So I will put a stop in here for a moment, and Anna, because I'd like to...
I get it.
We have many paths now in our traveling.
Many perspectives.
Many perspectives, yes. So maybe starting from this point of traveling through the Netherlands. So for you, from your perspective, those landscapes of Netherlands, but where you can see either a frozen river that enables to travel, or the painting by Van Hoyen, landscape with a river and a ferry on it, and also the travelers in the carts.
Like you said before, first of all, we see here the mobile society, the mobility, but of course we also see the boundaries of mobility. When we see those paintings, we can talk about that the highest speed in 17th century was the speed of the great horse on good road, or the great boat on the water. We can do math. We can calculate what the speed, the roads, and we can speak about how fast the information could travel in the modern era.
So we have the subject of traveling through the landscape, and also, but this was the landscape of Netherlands landscape, but also, as Katrien mentioned before, the artists were traveling to Italy, and I think it's with the painting that we have here of Jos Momper, we have the landscape that is not usual for the Netherlandish lands. And Katrien, would you like to tell us more about what can we tell from this Jos de Momper flight to Egypt? Once again, the subject present here.
Well, it's very interesting because, first of all, we have a long-standing tradition of representations of landscapes in the Low Countries, but especially first in the 15th century, southern Netherlands, with the seeing through views mostly in religious scenes. But then afterwards also we see these beautifully detailed landscapes. Think about Jan van Eyck, the Rollin Madonna, there's a whole tradition. And then in the 16th century the landscape is to become a pictorial genre, a pictorial category. And then we have Joachim Patenier, who is also called the first landscape painter by the big Albrecht Dürer, who was traveling through the Netherlands in 1520-21. So it's something that the landscape is born as an independent pictorial category. And this landscape also suits in that tradition in the sense that Patenier, he developed what we call a world landscape. And a world landscape is actually, the Weltlandschaft is actually... you see different geographical parts that cannot be seen in reality. So it's a construction, but all these landscapes are actually constructions or assemblages. It's an assembled landscape. Even this you can say, oh, it's a southern landscape. No, it's always a construction. And there are often topographical elements in it, be it architecture or small elements, natural elements, but it's 100% most of the time it's an assembled landscape. And what is so special about these kind of landscapes, they're later in the 16th century. Joseph Momper, he traveled through Italy in the 1590s, I think, or something. And we know that because he made some topographical drawings, that attest some sites that he saw in Italy. But what he does, and it's the same as what Peter Bruegel did some decades before, is actually they take these kind of topographical elements and they put them in a sort of constructed landscape that fits perfectly well in the pictorial tradition of the Netherlands, of the landscape actually. And so you see in this landscape also you see all the typical elements you see a castle on a rock, you see a river flowing down the landscape. You also see what is very typical is like the big tree framing the scene at the left-hand side. It's what we call a repoussoir. All these kind of typical elements, you would say, oh, it's a landscape he made on site. No, it's not true. It's a combination of reality and imagination. And I think this landscape, it's beautiful. Also because what is very typical for me or appealing is the southern lights. And it's something I think he must have seen when he traveled to Italy, because we don't have that kind of light here in the Low Countries. Except maybe on a very early morning during summer or something when there's a lot of light, but it has this kind of atmospheric light and it baths into this kind of southern light. It's very beautiful, I think.
So it also shows the fascination of the foreign lands, I would say. The fascination of the light that was bringing the artists to Italy, I think. But also about the traveling. The Dutch especially, they were traveling further away than Italy, and I would like to go now to maritime routes section of the exhibition, so maritime paintings, and especially one that I like the most, I think, in this section is Jacob Belvois, Shipping off the Dutch Coast. And for me, I must say, because we see two types of vessels in here, I mean like the ships. One is the boat that you would use inland, but the other one is the deep sea ship. And I'd like now to ask Anna, would you read this painting? What it brings you, what information it brings for you?
Of course, for me, this is the painting about colonization and about one of the most important sources of wealth of Netherlands, which was the maritime trade, the taking over the maritime routes, the factories, and of course this is also a good starting point to talk about the slavery trade.
Yes, that's true.
We don't have on the exhibition any portraits of slaves.
No, we don't have.
But we know that there exist in Netherlands paintings. We have ships. Now you are showing the model of supposedly a slave trade ship.
I'm showing the Witte Olifant from the model from Rijksmuseum, and this is a type of a ship that has a very wide, I don't know, like the body of the ship. So I guess this is the one that is supposed to bring yes.
There is one famous illustration, British I think, from 18th century, showing how the slave ships were packed with people. This is absolutely terrible illustration. It's estimated that on one ship it could be from about 200 to 400 slaves, and that about 15% of them died on the sea. Of course, once again, these paintings are beautiful. They are full of life, full of colors. But again, I'm sorry to say that I see death, and I see suffering, and I see this very, very specific source of wealth and prosperity for Netherlands.
Yeah. And yes, I only want to say that this type of deep sea ships, they were used by the West and East India Company. That is like a corporation, we would say nowadays, that was dealing with the colonies in Asia and in, I guess, South America. And also, as you said, this was the source of the really wealth of the country.
And they were extremely powerful. They, in the colonies, they act just like, almost like an independent state. They can start wars, making peace treaties. They can buy land. They took over trade routes. So this is also the starting point of one of the starting points of capitalism, of our modern trade, of corporations. So once again, we have a very interesting link between past and present here.
But also, I would like to go to the accumulation part of the exhibition and still lifes. Because I think it goes very well with the subject of the wealth built on the trade. What we can see, especially in the still lifes of Hedda, by example, because we can find many objects that could be found only in the Pacific Ocean, as the Nautilus shell. But also I think many other like China porcelain plate, and I know Anna is also fascinated with this way of reading this still life. So I will give her the floor now.
No, first of all, I very much enjoy the title of this part of the exhibition, the English title, which is accumulation, because for every Marxist, it's a very meaningful word, because when we speak accumulation, we speak about so-called primitive accumulation, this first phase of making capital, the first step of making capital. So once again, on these landscape paintings, I see the dialogue between man and nature. And here I see the dialogue between man and trade, man and foreign countries, man and everything which is exotic, but it's also our. This is our commodities. This is the showing off our power over the trade routes, and this is the showing of our power to accumulate wealth.
Yeah, I think it is being seen with the still lifes, with a table with many objects, but also the flower pieces. But but also we can talk now about Rickhals painting, which is quite the opposite, because when those still lifes by Hedda or Bolema de Stomme, they are with exotic objects that are showing off the wealth of the Dutch people. We have Rickhals, and I wonder, Katrien, what you see when you look at this scene in the inn by Rickhals, because there is this accumulation of the objects in the foreground.
A literal accumulation of objects there, yeah, it's true. And not in a Marxistic sense, but in the sense of accumulation of objects. But I think it's also, well, I wanted to say one thing about the Hedda painting, because I totally follow what you say about wealth and exotica and all those kind of things, but also one of the reasons why those exotica are included, I think, is also the artist trying to show off with that he's able to render all these different textures and materials, which is quite exceptional to do it in that way. It's an amazing painting, and if you go down to the Rickhals ones, it's exactly the same, because you see all these kind of different materials, textures. You see the light shining, reflecting, and it's amazing because it's not a realistic accumulation of how things were kept in an inn, not at all. But it's actually, I think, the artist showing off like, this is what I can. And it's also very interesting for me because, of course, like I see Bruegel everywhere in the landscapes, I see Brouwer everywhere in the inn scenes, and he's also one of those painters who is definitely indebted to Brouwer. Brouwer is the guy who invented those kind of those kind of tavern scenes, and you see that already during his lifetime, Adriaan Brouwer was very, very popular, and we have these kind of it's a term actually that we find in inventories, and it's brouwerkunst, and it's like tons of these kind of scenes made by lesser gods, to say, or not that well painters. Reykjals was one of the better, of course, but this is very exceptional because he combines this kind of in scene with an accumulation of all these kind of different objects, which is quite amazing. And also there is a difference in, I would almost say, technique, or the way the objects appear as living personages actually in the scene, and then you have the guys sitting at a table like in the back of the inn, not being of importance at all. So it's an intriguing painting to me.
Yeah, for me as well, and also it's nice to combine it or contrast it. From one side we have luxury, and from the other side we have a mess, like some leftovers.
Well, it's a very structured mess.
Yeah, I know.
So it's something.
I know, and it's and I agree with you 100% that this is to show off that he's able to do it. He's able to, even with the mess or litter, he's able to show off his technique. So,
but it's like, I agree to a certain extent, but it's not that it's a mess, because these are just like typical household objects that were not from the poorest social classes, because you see the barrel, okay, but then you see some.
But
things
this is a broken barrel.
Mm-hmm.
It's a broken barrel, you know, it doesn't have the bottom.
Yeah, it has a little hole that probably is functional, but...
but not in the way that barrels are. Yeah.
No, it's true. But he's showing off with low brow objects, if you want, which is a very nice thing to do, I think.
Yeah, I also think so. Yeah, but since we are with the genre subject, so I would like to go to our, I think, favorite and only actual genre scene in here, so with 10 years. And this scene at the well, because I know that both of you have a different perspective on what can be read and what can be seen in there. So, I don't know, Anna, maybe you will start?
Yes, first of all, this is one of these paintings when I can use the feminist point of view, because here we have the young woman at the well. We can talk about the woman's chores, we can talk about especially the water and the supplying of water as very common woman's duty. We can also, of course, speak here about the hygiene, about the access to water, and so on and so on. But we can also talk about the woman in public, because going to the well is also one of the moments when a woman leaves home and goes to the public, and it's sometimes dangerous place. Even in the Bible, we have the well as a dangerous place when women have to go, but something can happen to them. I think it was Jacob who met one of his wife at the well, and Moses too. I think there are some stories in the Bible about women, the well, and as a meeting point, but also as a dangerous point, all of this we have here, I think, because we have here the lonely woman an older man, this older woman looking through the window. I don't know if she's a guardian of this young woman.
Or a wife of this man.
Old man, yeah. And we have here the working woman. It's also important for me to stress, to talk about the woman at work, the woman, the duties of a woman. And so this is a very good starting point for lots and lots of themes concerning women.
Katrien, what you
to add to
see,
that, yeah, the well, it is actually like the source of all life, actually. But it's interesting to see that it can be a dangerous spot. But I think this painting also touches upon the core of what is a genre scene, actually. Because often what we entitle to be genre scenes today were not denotated back then in the 17th century like genre. It was like a conversation, a brothel, whatever. So a landscape. So the term itself, it's a bit complicated, but what is even more complicated is the interpretation of those kind of things. The decoding, which also refers to art in general. You need a lot of information about the historical, cultural, historical context, and that's why, well, our profession is that important. But it's something like, especially relating to genre scenes, it's very tricky because they seem like these realistic renderings of normal daily life scenes, which, well, like even the still lifes or the flowers, it's the same, and it looks very natural, very realistic, but there is always more than meets the eye. And then you have, there were a lot of debates like in the last decades about how far can you go with that. We had the big Panofsky iconology and seeing in every single detail, seeing a hidden meaning. Well, there is a lot to say about that, but you cannot see symbols in every single detail. Sometimes art is just to be enjoyed because of the sake of art. So it's very difficult, but I think a constant in these kind of genre scenes, be it Teniers, Brouwer, is that actually it is often, what you can say, lering en vermaak, so it's education, but also pleasure. That's very important, that often these kind of scenes, they hold up some kind of mirror to the viewer of behavior that is not to be considered right behavior, or that was not accepted in society according to the then prevailing norms and values. And if you look at this peaceful scene, well, there are of course also sexual connotations. You can think about the well, but also distorted relations between men and women, because that's also a very popular theme, and we have some amazing examples of that, like also the other way around, where the woman is like powerful and the man is like, she has manly features, she's wearing the trousers, but the man is like the weak one who is between the chickens, and it's very, very funny. So it goes both ways, but that's more in the 16th century, like earlier 16th century, and then later on Teniers and Brouwer, it's mostly the other way around. So the old man and then the young lady, and the old man, he is, it's difficult for him to hold his hands. And what is also very interesting is that we see this kind of third spectator looking through the window, which is often an old man-like ugly woman. And it's also related, I think, to certain representation strategies that we also see in comic theater. And that is also something interesting in the sense that genre scenes, they often depict so everyday scenes, but they always pick the same characters. So you have the quack is also one of those, the charlatan, the peasant. They have this kind of stereotypical characteristics, and it's always the same, and you see that in the paintings, but also in the comic theater of that days.
Yeah, so maybe because you mentioned the quack doctor, so maybe we will just go also to this painting. I think Van Leuven is a very interesting painting by him, and what you said about staging, some sort of performing, and I think also maybe you would like to make an introduction to this situation that we see, because it's also very Bruegel, like from Bruegel.
Yeah.
So the enjoying of the holiday in a village.
Yeah, it's very much related to the kermisses, if you want, like the village country fairs. And what is interesting is that, well, if you think about Bruegel, because he was, the master of the peasants and the peasants and the country life and the kermisses, what is very interesting is that you see that sometimes these kind of, what we see here actually, is these kind of rich burghers being included in this kind of lowbrow village fair. And that's something that goes back also to Bruegel's days, because, like I said in the beginning of our talk, Nicolaas Jongelink, who was one of the patrons of Bruegel, he was one of those typical Antwerp burghers who had a mansion, a villa suburbana in the country. And a lot of those rich burghers had an interest also in the country, were lords of certain manors like Hoboken and a lot of others. And they had a specific interest, so in country life, but they also ordered these kind of scenes and they hung them in whatever, their dining room or other places in their house. And it's a novelty that they portray themselves. So it's something that you would say it doesn't match at all. You have a low-brow, like country fair village, and then you see these rich, elegant burghers. But it is something that was quite common. Actually, and what is very interesting here is that we see the quake doctor. He is one of those typical characters that we see in the genre scenes, but also in the comic theater. A charlatan who is definitely, he's not able to cure people, but people do believe it, and it's so
he's
funny
promising something that he cannot fulfill, like some sort of a miracle, right? I think it's.
And if you look at him, you see that he will not be able to provide what he does. You know, people should look through it, but that's the pun also. There's a lot of humor, and also in the costumes of these kind of characters, like they are typically dressed like in an antique way or something. That's something that sometimes we don't see as a modern viewer, but they are often, it's like Marie-Louise van Rijmerswale also does it. The costumes are old-fashioned often, which is an extra direction in the...
to ridicule them.
Yeah.
Anna, what do you see?
First of all, I see the illustration of one of the theses of Peter Berg. Peter Berg is an author of a book about the popular culture, and he says in this book that in medieval times the upper classes participated in popular culture. They have their own culture, but they also fully participated in popular living. And then in modernity, in modern times, the upper classes started to withdraw themselves from the popular culture, so start to distance themselves. And I think what we see here is part of this process. And what Katrien said is also part of this process, because the upper classes are not participating, they are looking at the people. They are looking at the scenes from the peasants' lives, they are looking at the quack doctors, at the villages and so on and so on. They are not part of it. They are like viewers. This is the different position than before, than in medieval times. And of course, I very much enjoy this topic of medicine as theater, and popular theater as a point of reference for looking at the pictures. And also, this is a very good starting point to talk about the private-public dichotomy, because I don't think we now think about medicine as something to show, to make a spectacle of it. But in these paintings, the spectacle is a very important part of the healing process. Maybe even it's a condition for the medicine to work.
Maybe it's it's like with placebo when like 50% of working of the medicine is just that you believe in it.
Yes,
so
I have to show that I'm healed.
Yeah.
Well, it's something that you see throughout different cultures, like a community ritual of maybe. But I would like to say something about what you said, referring to Peter Berg and popular culture and all those things. Well, it's true that higher social classes, they also took part in that, but always in a very stylized and ritualized way, of course. And that's exactly what we see here. And so even if maybe the kermisses with Bruegel and the lords who ordered the paintings, I can imagine that sometimes they also just went into the total bacchanalia or something of too much drink and too much dancing and whatever. But the representations always show a very distant, it's very clear that they belong to a different, higher social class. And this is a very good example of that.
Yeah, that is true. And also for me, it's an image of what happens when you don't have public health service. Because this is exactly the situation, right?
Yeah, but it's true. But on the other hand, in that time, they had more medical knowledge than this. This is like just someone trying to, how do you say that? Like lift people up, fool them. And just people are, if they are foolish enough to pay him, then they are completely foolish themselves.
Yeah, and this is very interesting because, yes, the fooling of the people, also this figure of quack doctor or the false orator, I don't like that. It's also a figure in this painting of Jan Mikker. There is this close-up of the hell, or just the road to hell, when you have this the same performing person who looks like a quack doctor. So I understand that this personage, they were just like very much a touch of with deceiving people, not giving them the right cure, not giving them the right solutions. So it's also interesting to see it in this bad way of doing with your life.
Well, it's all related to the right path of life and people distracting you from that right road, which should apparently bring you to heaven and not to hell, but sometimes.
Yeah. There are some distractions. And as much as I enjoy our conversation, but I'm afraid that our time is finishing, so I think it's time to sum up. And there were so many interesting subjects that we merely touched upon. But I think that what I have in my mind is that every painting from old masters, it brings a story within itself, and it's not only one story, but I think more than one way of reading it. But also that we should be very careful. Because very often what you see is not what you get, so it can't be read as some sort of a text or a document. And as Katrien was pointing out, that even the landscapes can be deceiving, that they are promising of some sort of a view that maybe it's like a photographic view. But it's only created, it's a creation of the imagination of the artist. However, I think that we should just enjoy watching the paintings and look for the meaning for ourselves. And I invite our viewers to visit our exhibition and to look with maybe a different perspective that you would normally do. And I hope that our discussion in here with my wonderful guests, that I thank you very much for your thoughts and for sharing with us these different ways of seeing the paintings. So thank you once again.
You're very welcome.
And I hope maybe someday we will continue our search for meaning in old master paintings. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please comment under the post where our meeting will be published. Thank you.